GLEX Global Exploration.
It's great to be here. Bom dia. My Portuguese is a little Brazilian because that's where I learned what I know. What a stimulating morning it's been, and we're just getting going. I stand between you and the conversations we can all have together, so I want to get through this quickly. At the same time, I want to get clear on something that I've learned in my 40 years now. This is my 40th year as a journalist, and I didn't come out of the womb to be a journalist. I kind of got pulled into this arena because in the 20th century, it was a heroic kind of journey. Where I grew up in New England, we listened to Walter Cronkite on the evening news saying, "That's the way it is." That was his sign-off every night until 1982, and journalism was telling us the way it is. And as I got into journalism, the words I lived by were great story, Andy. And all the journalists in this room know that feeling, of those who've written for National Geographic. And it was if you got back into the newsroom after an assignment or you logged on in the internet era and you got a sense of response. But the scariness that I'm talking about today is not just about reporting from the burning Amazon and the melting North Pole and everything in between. As you can see here, I've been the Vatican, the White House, you name it, interrogating every part of the climate question and the biodiversity question. The part of the science that I've stumbled into led me to realize the limits of story as a conveyor, as a convincer. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. And it's not hopeless, but because it leads to a whole arena of possibilities. Very briefly, I was the baby boom kid, like many of you in this room and probably who will watch this online, growing up with a sense of very simple stories: the American century, progress, industrialization, capitalism. These were all these great trajectories toward progress. And actually, they still are in most cases. People have been pulled out of poverty. Mortality of kids has just plummeted. And it all felt sort of simple. It might all be my fault that what's happened later, because you see where I am on the graph of us. I came, as we heard earlier, right at 2.7 billion, and there comes Andy Revkin. Maybe everything that happened since then is kind of my fault. I don't think so. Of course, this was in 2011. There used to be a tool online where you plug in your birth date and you see where you are. And of course, now we're up to 8 billion just this past year. And that all feels unnerving in many ways, but it doesn't lead to a sense of the end times either. I got into journalism through story. Like many of you, I grew up with some of the great storytellers and science storytellers of our time. Rachel Carson, of course, Cousteau, Sagan. But Cousteau particularly, I grew up near the water. My favorite bar mitzvah present, the one I still own now that I'm 67, I got it in 1969, is that U.S. diver's mask, which was Cousteau's company. It made me feel like I was in touch with him directly. And when I got out of college, the first thing I did, applied for a fellowship, and my task was to go understand man's relationship to the sea. And I was going to island communities. I should have come to the Azores. That wasn't on my list at the time. And I ended up on a sailboat for a year and a half, 17 months, 15,000 miles, 2/3 of the way around the world. I was the first mate on a very funky sailboat. And the things I saw and photographed back in those days are what pulled me into journalism. And they included plastic pollution, right near where Chris Rainier was talking about, in between New Guinea and Australia. There's Adolphus Island, and we anchored there, and we're collecting what was the dominant source of plastic debris at that time, which was fishing gear. And I look back at that picture now and think about the plastic treaty we're now negotiating. It's kind of fascinating to see. In the Red Sea, just before we entered the Red Sea, we pulled into Djibouti after a 21-day sail across the Western Indian Ocean. And what did I see as I was wandering the streets? A tobacco shop was selling leopard skins by the dozen. I took that picture, and those experiences, both the wonder, seeing the spectacular regions of the world, being in the middle of the ocean, seeing some orcas near Sri Lanka, and that wonderment that I wanted to share with the world was part of what drove me into journalism, but very much so also the peril and loss we were seeing, like these leopard skins. Where did they come from? Where were they going? I can tell you a long story about that. Stories do matter. And I got into the world of sort of global environmental problems in a big way. In 1983, I wrote about an herbicide that was both fantastic and terrible. And how many things around us now, technologies, are fantastic and terrible and unknowable going forward, AI and the like. Nuclear winter to global warming in 1988. The year global warming became a story was my first cover story on that problem. And again, it seems simple. I'm going to tell this story, I was in the groove getting awards. That first one won a big investigative reporters award. But there were these signs of complexity. Look what was on the back cover of Discover magazine, which is a science magazine. We're selling global warming concern on the front cover and tobacco on the back cover. So complexity is part of the story. And I love this. What you see isn't what you get. Absolutely true. This ad wasn't telling you exactly what you were going to get. So we're having a sequence of talks here on fire and ice, and I want to take you to the burning story that I first wrote about. Most of that coverage in the 80s for me was sort of from a distance. Global warming is this atmospheric change that affects everywhere but has no real center. But the burning of the Amazon and other rainforests really does have a center. And 1988, when that photo was taken by Greenpeace, I latched onto the story of the murder of Chico Mendes in the far corner of the Amazon basin. And I was 32 years old. I'd never written a book. I did not speak any Portuguese, and I put together a proposal to go to the Amazon. And I went down there, and for 4 months I was in Brazil interrogating this question: who was Chico Mendes, who represented the peoples of the forest, and who were the people who were coming into the Amazon and driving those folks out of the forest, and murderously quite often. And it exposed me to one of the real core realities of the environment story. People talk about me as an environment reporter. There's an environment desk at the Guardian. But so much of the problems that are generating environmental impacts are societal. They're political, societal. Brazil had its Nossa Amazonia program, to occupy so as not to lose, ocupar para não entregar. And ranchers were the bandeirantes. They were the pioneers, leading Brazil into settling this region. Limpar is the word in Portuguese that the ranchers used when they were clearing their land. And seeing this scene in Manaus was unforgettable for me. I took this picture at a funeral parlor that had coffins in various sizes. Now, infant mortality, as I said earlier, has plummeted around the world, but it's still a problem that besets far too many families on this planet. And it was shocking to think of this. Starbucks didn't exist then, but it does now. And the idea that there's a place that has like small, medium, large for coffins really sits in my head quite often. And I interviewed the killer of Chico Mendes, Darly Alves in the middle, and his father, and that's the guy who pulled the trigger, the son. This is a murderous family. And one of my most unnerving moments as a reporter, because you have to talk to everybody, was sitting on Sebastian Alves' front porch, talking with him about Chico Mendes and how the injustice of these rubber tappers trying to prevent their right to take down the forest on their land. And I was at the trial of his kids later, his child and his grandchild. You can see me, that's my Zelig moment, if you've ever seen that Woody Allen movie where someone just pops up. There I am in the corner. And, maybe I took out the wrong slide. At any rate, Sebastian Alves said to me, we're sitting there's a thunderstorm building, as it always happens in the Amazon late in the day. And he says, Chico Mendes spent too much time alive. It was that simple. And the societal aspects of environmental stories became so clear to me going forward. And the ice story came after I got to this ecosystem, the New York Times, where I spent 21 years altogether, 14 of them as a reporter, and the last as a my .earth blog. And I covered every facet of this climate story, the politics, the diplomacy, the science. It was usually the politics got on the front page, not the science. But the North Pole was becoming an interesting place on this planet. As you all know, the Arctic is warming, now, I think they say now 4 times faster than the planetary average. So I got to go to the Arctic, go to the North Pole, land there in an airplane in 2003, which is 20 years ago. And I shot video. I didn't have to. My reporter's job at the New York Times did not include taking video or photography, but I felt if I'm going to the North Pole, I better damn well come back with everything I can. So there's nothing but south from here. 2 miles of water beneath us, and nothingness around us. There was much thicker ice in 2003 when I went than there is now. You know, some of you have been there. I think the last flight like this was in 2018 because you can't carve a runway in this ice floating on the Arctic Ocean anymore with any reliability. This was the most unnerving moment there. The ice is floating on the ocean. The ocean is 14,000 feet deep, and the water's below freezing, about 29 degrees Fahrenheit. And the ice is moving. When I wrote my book, The North Pole Was Here, it was because the camp we were at was shifted day by day, miles, kilometers, many days.
We're on actually starting to fail a bit more. Probably hairline cracks up the towards the helos there.
So does that mean we should back up?
Not yet. You can always jump over a crack.
These Arctic scientists and explorers are so cavalier. You can always jump over a crack. So that was one of my most unnerving quotes from somebody in my reporting. And then comes the mind. The climate in here became clear increasingly to be a really significant part of what we think of as a biogeophysical political problem. So much of it is about how we perceive, misperceive information, how we have cultural differences and how that all happens. And I backed into that research. I wish now, if I could fast rewind back, if I'd started talking to social and behavioral scientists earlier in my career, I would have done much more effective work, maybe. Al Gore's movie, the movie about Al Gore came out in 2006, and the issue in the United States became extremely polarized right around then, partially because of the politics, including Al. And it's just unfortunate, but that's the way the world works. And I found, as I was digging in, I wrote this piece, Yelling Fire on a Hot Planet, and a social scientist said, well, the things that people care about, the things they vote about, are things that are soon, salient, and certain. Helen Ingram told me that in 2006. And I thought about the climate problem and realized how many of those dimensions of that problem are not like that. And that led me to talk to more and more behavioral scientists. This one really was an existential challenge to me as a journalist, and anyone who's a communicator about climate or biodiversity should read the work of Dan Kahane. He's at Yale Law School, but he's a behavioral scientist. And he found that the people who have the best understanding of climate science are at both ends of the spectrum of climate belief, meaning alarmed and dismissive. Steve Koonin, who had a best-selling book in America on the uncertainty, is a super smart physicist, and he's at one far end, and Al Gore, of course, is at the other. Now, what does that say to you if you're a communicator? It says, well, more science, putting out more science writing doesn't really matter if this is the ecosystem it's flowing into. So I think there should be a sequel to his movie called An Inconvenient Mind. And there's so many reasons. You can find a Nobel Prize-winning physicist to support any argument on climate change. I canvassed their beliefs, and this is a fact, and that's very disturbing. And there are so many other aspects of the brain, is like this early brain wrapped in a modern brain, and those early components, fight or flight, you're focused on real-time risk and not long-term risk. Status quo bias is a thing. I spoke about this once, and a young student made this cartoon. And it's easy to maintain the status quo. It's very hard to change it. And it's not just about politics. It's about more fundamental parts of what we are as humans. And that can leave you feeling like this cameraman. I took this picture at Copenhagen at the climate talks in 2009, the end of the negotiations, which failed. And he expresses something I think we all feel sometimes. But I don't want you to go away feeling there's nothing to do, because there's so many things to do. The Amazon continues to burn. Jair Bolsonaro, he's out of office, but that doesn't mean Bolsonarism is gone. The Amazon has many ranchers and developers and industrialists who want to keep pushing forward. And, but it has this. the rubber tappers I reported on back in 1989, the way they diverted and delayed deforestation was by communication, but it wasn't storytelling. It was connectivity. So connectivity, moving from storytelling to connecting, to conversing, that's what's happened to me increasingly. My journalism doesn't look like it did back in the day. It's about connecting people. And here, just to show you, this was, they had heard through, and they took down the cabin of the cutting crew. So now we've moved from radio Sipa to drones and phones. If you've seen the movie, several recent documentaries about indigenous tribes who are using technology and partnerships to make progress. That's communication. It's not a story, but it's a way to make enormous progress. Getting people connected to divert bad behavior and to foster better outcomes is the way forward. And the same thing for ice. You know, the ice, as I said, is greatly diminished since back in the day. And you can't set up that camp that I visited anymore. My two sons will never go to the North Pole except on a icebreaker, because you still need the icebreaker durability. And it's a sad thing. But here's a remarkable shift that's happening is indigenous communities and scientists working together to create new knowledge and to create resilience. This is the Inupiat Kotzebue on the Arctic shore. The Inupiat community there partnered with some scientists at Columbia and the University of Alaska to build a relationship. They got money from the Moore Foundation, not for a project, not for an outcome, not for a new study of climate on sea ice, but to create a relationship, a two-way fluency between the indigenous expertise and the scientists coming with Western kinds of knowledge. And together, they've created half a dozen peer-reviewed papers, and there's a film that's in English and in their language. So finding ways to do what this summit is doing, connecting disciplines, connecting communities, connecting disenfranchised people who've never been at the table is the path forward. And that's the way past that. I thought this was, the internet to me was miraculous when I was early on, like right through 2010, 2011. I was a blogger. I moved from writing to blogging. It was fantastic. Then Rush Limbaugh told me to kill myself on the radio. I don't have time to play maybe I'll play a tiny bit of the clip.
This guy from the New York Times,
so you can raise
if he really thinks that humanity is destroying the planet, humanity is destroying the climate, that human beings in their natural existence are going to cause the extinction of life on Earth, Andrew Revkin. Mr. Revkin, why don't you just go kill yourself and help the planet by dying?
Wow. Still amazing, but I've outlived him. The upside, the internet is very noisy, and it can be used in every way possible to make things worse or better. My early experiments on .earth included out-of-the-box ways to get people's voices where they aren't, to think about ways to humanize conversations so that it's not just people typing or typing this way, and you're throwing bombs at each other, digital bombs. So one thing I did on .earth, which went for 9 years, had 100,000 comments, several million readers, and no one said, hey, Andy, we need a blog on sustainability. I just did it at the Times. This happened. One day I realized we could have comments as YouTube videos, and I put out a post saying, hey, everybody, all you .earth readers, post a little greeting, a video of yourself, just telling us who you are, so we have a face for you. Like in the Harry Potter movies with that, they had the newspaper that was all like animated. I thought that's the way we can connect online better. And so Wang Suya, she was Chinese-born but working in Tokyo, she was the first person to do this.
Hello everyone, I'm Wang Suya. I'm here in Japan to say greeting to you. Hope you write more and more comments on .earth. Of course, I will read more and more comments on .earth too. Thank you.
So the more that we can do as communicators to tell stories for sure, but to make sure we're receiving stories as well and propagating conversations, the better off the world will be. I'm sure of this. I'm convinced of it. The other reality is there is this phenomenon called response diversity. Just Google for it. I won't have time to explain it. Diversity is our friend. Sometimes it doesn't feel good. There are people you know who love nuclear power or are all about solar, and they get into raging arguments, which are kind of a waste of time. So finding ways to embrace diversity and move forward is a key goal as well. And Elon Musk, for all of his wacky behavior and what he's doing to Twitter, Twitter is still useful. It's a wonderful tool. I can tell you about that more in a second. But this tweet of his, I think, is one of the best things I've ever seen him say. Because it consists of billions of bidirectional interactions per day, Twitter can be thought of as a collective cybernetic superintelligence with a lot of room for improvement. I wish he would say that more. And I think I did, I tweeted last night. I'm going to close by just giving you a little. We were out on the BioBlitz, right? And I couldn't resist tweeting the extraordinary sound of the Corey's shearwater. Hold on a second. Hold on. So that's what we got to do. So please join me in that journey, and I'll feel happy. Thank you.